Kate Daniels has been an instructional designer for the past 10 years. She's worked on online learning, design, and development work for both the corporate sector and a couple of universities as well, including DePaul University and Loyola University Chicago. We're very happy that Kate was able to make some time to be with us. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kate Daniels, our speaker for today.
Oh, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Galvin and Father Johnny and everyone at SALT for inviting me. I had such a wonderful time in Quezon City in 2018 with the SALT team, and I was thrilled to hear from Father Johnny a couple of weeks ago. As Galvin mentioned, I'm based here in Chicago, and I have been working full-time as an instructional designer for the past decade, but before that, I was actually teaching online. I first started teaching online in 2005, so 15 years ago, for Columbia College, Chicago. So it was a very different landscape. A lot has changed since then, but I've been hooked on the environment and kind of all the possibilities herein. So I know that there's probably a whole range of feelings about what's going on right now with all of you. I remember the first time I was asked to teach online, it felt very, it just felt like completely unknown territory. I was very skeptical, and I went in, and what I wanted more than anything else was to engage the students. I was just terrified that my students wouldn't do the assignments, and it ended up being an incredible experience and made me want to go back to earn my master's in instructional design. So the title of this presentation is Activate Student Engagement in the Online Setting. That is, as I mentioned, that was kind of what drove me when I first started teaching online, and hopefully it's what's driving you too. The students are the reason why we're all doing this, and we want to make sure that they're having the most positive and engaging and effective learning experience possible. So just quickly, an overview of the agenda. We'll talk about the learning ecosystem, kind of then and now. We'll look at a week in the life for online students, online instructors. We'll talk about a foundational theory called transactional distance that's kind of informed a lot of my work in this space. And then I know it's also cascading into the SALT work as well, which is a three-pronged approach to instructional design. So we'll look at that. We'll kind of blow out what it means to really design for content, for a cohort to build community, and for you as instructors to be present and to be considered as coaches, supportive coaches to your online students. If we have time, I'll talk about some faculty time savers, but I want to make sure we can squeeze in Q&A at the end. So just quickly in the chat box, we won't take too much time about this. What do you feel is required to succeed as an online instructor? Just anything that comes to mind. Don't think too hard, but as you think about what's ahead of you, what do you think is required to succeed? Creativity, connectivity, complete retooling, lots of prep time. I'm seeing a lot of creativity as answers. Great. Compassion, technical know-how. These are wonderful answers. I have kind of just a quick 3-point answer, and I'm going to say yes to everything you said in the box. One is knowledge of subject matter, and guess what? You guys have that already. You're all already subject matter experts, so you're ahead of the game there. To teach online well and successfully, you need to be supported by pedagogy. Now, I know that the SALT team already kind of has that very strong foundation, and some of you probably already do as well. My experience working with a number of American universities is that many faculty members do not have pedagogy supporting their instruction. They may be really enthusiastic about the subject, but they're not necessarily designing with learning design principles in mind, with learning objectives. They're not creating assessments to evaluate whether learning objectives are being met. Perhaps some of you are already doing this, perhaps some of you aren't, but it's so essential that this informs online teaching. And then an openness to technology. So yes, this includes a creativity element and a compassion element. It's just the landscape we have here now. It's really tremendous what we're able to do more and more. I mean, even 15 years ago when I was teaching online, I couldn't believe the connections I was making with my students. I couldn't believe the way they were responding to discussion questions as thoughtfully as they were. And I had taught face-to-face at a university as well, and I wasn't getting the same kind of engagement as I did with online. So that's when I really started opening to technology and the unique affordances of technology with regards to instruction. So thinking about the learning ecosystem, we had maybe 2 to 3 peers that we were interacting with in each class that we took. We had our library, we had textbooks, we had the instructor. It was pretty straightforward. Maybe we went back home and did homework, we worked on it in the library. We weren't necessarily using a computer, some of us were. So now when we think about the student's experience, when you think about the online setting, they're surrounded by dozens of peers. They're interacting with dozens of peers, virtual resources and portals. They have collaboration tools. They still have their traditional textbooks in many cases. They have labs and simulations. So really it has changed quite a bit in the last maybe 50 years. And then when we look at this graphic, this was actually constructed by someone at Macquarie University in Sydney back in 2015. So even 5 years ago, when we're looking at Web 2.0 technologies, I mean, since then, even more tools have emerged, but this gives you a sense of the learning ecosystem now, right? So it feels somewhat endless. And there's just so much possibility in here. And one of the things that I know that Father Johnny and the SALT team want Ateneo faculty to think about is this distinction between remote teaching, right? So where we're talking about a situation where you're purely doing synchronous sessions like this one online. You're having a live webinar and you're basically lecturing to students. You may have some discussion and that's it. And then there's this concept of distance learning, which is completely asynchronous, where students may be working independently on different projects. They're really, an example would be a massive online course where they're not really engaged by the community or by their instructor, but they're very much focused on the content. And the goal for Ateneo is for online learning, which is really a merge of both of these things and all of these things that you see here, where you're getting a full experience that's including the asynchronous experience, the synchronous experience, and all the different ways you can interact through technology. When we're thinking about traditional activities in the classroom and then the digital environment, let's look at how these go from one to the next. So traditionally, you have your lectures, and in the digital environment, that can turn to synchronous sessions, videos, podcasts. In a face-to-face class, you'll have a discussion, and that then translate in the digital environment to discussion boards, Skype, Collaborate, which is a whiteboarding tool. Labs can turn into simulations, virtual reality, augmented reality. Exams in the traditional setting can be timed and proctored with tools like Respondus. So, and there's very advanced tools right now that even can track eyeball movement and things like this, depending on how secure you need your exams to be. Office hours can now move to Skype meetings or Collaborate, which is a whiteboarding tool. And then, traditionally, if they're reading, now they can read it. They can still read traditionally, right? They can still order books and text. They can still print documents, or they can read it digitally. Assignments can be vetted through Turnitin, which is a software that detects plagiarism in student work, if that's something that you're interested in doing. And then there are ways to support studying, such as Tiny Cards, Quizlet, Study Blue, a number of tools that allow students to quiz themselves this way. So let's quickly look at what a week in the life of an online student might be like. And I should ask, if you want to, in the chat box, if you want to say, how many hours a week do you typically spend teaching each course? So many of you are saying 3 hours. So that would, I'm assuming, is lecture. But I also want you to think about the time you're spending grading, reviewing student materials, interacting with students, emails, things like that. Okay, so now we've moved to 12 hours, 25 hours a week, 14. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a real range depending on the course and depending on the level of the students and things like that. Well, let's look at this a week in the life of and of course it's always different from student to student, but what it might look like for an online student. The student might spend Monday reading and viewing mini lectures. On Tuesday, they continue reading. They may post to a discussion board, or they may create a blog entry. On Wednesday, they do more discussion posts and responses. Thursday, perhaps they're working on an assignment and more discussion responses. Maybe they're reading some more. Friday, maybe they're given a knowledge check. They may have a group project meeting through Skype. Saturday, they may take off. Sunday, or not. I mean, you could swap this where they submit a quiz or exam and they begin next week's readings. And with faculty, it may look like this, where you post an announcement about the coming week, letting them know what's coming. And perhaps you're grading submissions from the prior week. You can address emails from students 1 day a week on Tuesdays. Wednesday, you could review discussion posts. Thursdays, you could hold virtual office hours and then review more discussion responses. On Friday, you can address more emails from students. Saturday, you can respond to certain forum questions in your discussion board. So there can be rhyme and reason to all of this so that you're not feeling like you're working around the clock teaching the course. You can actually set up a schedule that works for you. And, I think the purpose of this slide is really to say some faculty think that it takes a lot less time to teach online. Up front, I would say it definitely takes more time in terms of prep. But once you start teaching, it's pretty close to the same amount of time. It's just handled in a different way. So just briefly want to talk about this concept of transactional distance. Michael Moore, who was a professor of education at Penn State in the 70s, he first introduced this concept, which applies to both the physical and psychological separation between the learner, the content, and the instructor. And just to get to the meat of what he's saying is how important it is when you have this distance between the instructor and the student and the student and their cohort. It's very important to have high structure and high dialogue to create an effective learning experience. So that's kind of how I have designed online courses for the higher ed community, is keeping this in mind. The instructional designer thinks about the structure, the autonomy, the dialogue, and the less the instructor directly interacts with the online learner, the more autonomy should be allowed, okay? So that's when we were talking about asynchronous, like a completely asynchronous solution, distance learning. That would involve very, very high structure because you're not expecting to interact with the student except when they submit assignments. But when you're in an online learning environment, you really want both the high structure and the high dialogue so that you're building out and strengthening the connection between the student and the instructor, as well as the student and their cohort. And that's where we come to this three-pronged approach to design, which is content, community, and instructor. Okay, so those are the three key things we're going to be looking at when thinking about designing an online course. So the key with all of these things is interaction. So as much as we can get a student to interact with the content, as much as we can get the student to interact with their cohort and with you, the coach, that is what will dictate how engaged they are. So when we think now about that, what does it mean to really engage with content? Today, anybody can, if there's a topic someone wants to learn about, they can Google and find out a lot of information. And I say, you know, content is cheap these days. Free online libraries are everywhere. But the way that you'll make it a distinctive experience is by presenting it in unique and memorable ways. And because of your expertise in your field, you are the curator, you're able to curate a series of articles or exercises, activities, any number of things that really creates a unique experience around the content. With regards to the cohort, it's important to think about how students, when they connect with their classmates, some of these relationships end up extending far into their careers, especially graduate students, but even undergraduate students. But more than that, when they're learning from each other through discussion boards and working on group projects, it definitely adds depth and diversity to the content for them. And it helps give them different perspective on the content. It also increases their accountability. So some students, when they know that their classmates are also working on a project, it just pushes them along a little bit more. And like I said, it lasts well beyond the courses. I mean, all of us have fond memories of some group projects we've done back in college, or work that if we heard a classmate do offer a presentation, those kinds of things are very memorable and keep students connected to the course long after they leave. And then thinking about the coach element, what you bring to it, your humanity, your particular and unique expertise and knowledge base, your experiences in education, in the field, in life, all of these things that you bring to the student create a memorable experience for them. So right now, the default student experience really privileges content, and the cohort and the coach kind of are just less emphasized, less important. As Galvin mentioned, I worked at DePaul University. I was actually a full-time instructional designer there for several years. And we did a lot of surveying students and getting to know students who were taking online courses. And we asked them, if you had the opportunity to design your ideal online course experience, what are the features you would include? And they said prompt, personalized feedback, interaction with the instructor and other students, an instructor familiar with the functionality and features of the LMS. And again, the desired experience is to have kind of an equal weight of content, cohort, and coach. This is what the features that they would include. So this prompt personalized feedback, right? So that's, again, establishing your presence. You're not just a faculty member who logs in once a week or once a month and then tunes out. You're there and you're giving them prompt and personalized feedback. And obviously they want that interaction with you. They want interaction with their classmates. And they also hope that their instructor is familiar with the functionality and features of the LMS. Yeah, so I just want to say a brief thing about LMSs. They're all so similar now. They all have a lot of the same functionalities. It's just housed in a different way, and that can be a little disorienting at first, but I know that there's plenty of support in place for you to learn these tools. I just want to say, you know, don't let that concern you, because the tools come and go. I mean, I've probably worked in maybe 20 LMSs over the last 15 years. And it's just one of those things. There's there's a learning curve, but it usually doesn't last more than 3 or 4 solid hours. And if you can just commit to that and say, you know what, I'm going to get comfortable in this environment, I think you'll find it won't be too troubling.